Ladies, gentlemen, people of non-binary gender, I have a confession to make before we get into this review, and that is that in the first 2 minutes of me turning on this camera to start talking about this show, I tried to open up doing a Truman Capote impression, and I will spare you the details of that horrendous failure. Because I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. Oh man, I tried and it was crazy. So, it's the new season of Feud. This one's called Capote versus the Swans. Yeah, that's right. If you remember, like 6 years ago, I talked about the first season of Feud on this channel, dedicated to Joan Crawford and Betty Davis and their feud about their lives making whatever happened to Baby Jane, whatever it's called. You know what I mean? That show was great. I really liked that one. Maybe because I'm just like a sucker for old Hollywood and like two badass ladies just hating each other. I love that stuff. And I always knew that this was like the forgotten property in like the Ryan Murphy created all this crap. There's American Horror Story, American Crime Story. There's other ones. I don't know. But this one's like, whatever. No one's really doing anything with it. And then they're like, actually, we've been trying to do the Capote book for a while. The Capote's Women, or like the Women of Capote or something, whatever it's called. People like Capote. And that's fine. Like, cool, you know? He's kind of like a lost relic, I think, to like a younger generation, where you're like, oh, there was like a weird socialite that's kind of like hung out with like the most prominent women in like New York, and he's like, this weird guy just was there. And you're like, yeah, this weird guy was just there, and he was like a writer, and he just was like this affluent socialite that everybody knew and respected, and he was like a coastal guy where people knew him on the East Coast and the West Coast, and he was just like one of those people. Not many like younger people are interested in the Truman Capote of it all. He was kind of like an aspirational figure of just like, this is like a guy who gets to live his life, be himself, and be sassy everywhere, you know? He's a relic of a time. But he is an interesting enough figure to make a thing about. And Feud, sure, that's the place to do it, I suppose. 8 episodes based on the book, sure. I was genuinely interested in this show when they started to tease it, because I'm like, this is kind of interesting. I was not sold on the concept alone of Truman Capote. What sold me was the fine cast of characters we had playing the Swans. I was obsessed with every single name we pulled in there. Ooh, boy, was I happy to see some of those names. That got me excited. But this was also like the season that Ryan Murphy didn't really get involved in, which is also kind of exciting because he has a very specific mindset and he makes things look a certain way, gets things to act in a specific sense. So just hanging on to that for so long, you're like, we don't need this forever, right? So him not being a part of it, it got me excited. I'm like, okay, a cool enough story with people I like. Okay, what are we going to do? Unfortunately, we're not going to do much of anything. This show kind of suffers from just feeling like it exists solely because we had to make it, like there was a contractual obligation to put this out there. It doesn't have like this special feeling about it in any sense of the word. It looks as good as the other ones, if only a little less earnest in its approach, and that's kind of a shame, because this could be something interesting. This conception of a story, you have this openly gay man who is very important in these women's lives. He betrays them, and then it's just the fallout of him slowly losing himself, slowly becoming who he is, and eventually dying. And these women who are trying to rebuild their stature and their status after the events of him. And that's kind of fun. You do see a couple of things where like people lose themselves and they're kind of like gone and just out of like the socialite circle. But it never truly like plays itself like there's any big consequence. People lose money, people like lose their relationships and stuff. But it's still like, it just feels like the show doesn't want this to feel gritty and more shiny, if that makes sense. We're going to talk about these issues, we're going to see these issues, but we're never actually going to like let these women be perceived as lesser than Capote. Which I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like if you're going to do like the versus story, right? We should see more of like the ramifications coming on all sides. But the problem I find right away is that a lot of this show really wants you to spend time with Truman Capote. And that is a figure, personally, I find him repugnant. I've never liked the guy. I never found him interesting. And Tom Hollander's portrayal is truly insane. It is just a guy doing a voice, wearing a suit, being a little stinker, acting like a little freak. This entire thing hinges on everybody, no matter where Capote is. If he's not on screen, everyone is asking, where is Capote? What is Capote doing? How does Capote feel about this? We talk about him so freaking much. And I get it. I get it. He's the title character. When you have a portrayal that's so annoying and so easy to despise, it never comes across as like an evenly sided match. He always feels like we're the one we're supposed to hate. And that just makes you go, yeah, I don't like him. The actions he is doing, he's not really trying to be better. Why do I feel any sympathy for him? I don't. Sometimes they push it to where you do have to feel sympathy for him, but it never worked for me personally. I was just like, I know the beats. I know what we're trying to say of Capote here. It's not that interesting. It's not that interesting what happens to him or what he does. He's all talk, all bark, no bite. Nothing really fun with Capote. But Hollander is giving it his all. He said, I can do a Capote voice. See, I'm not even going to attempt to try it. And he's like, I can do one. It's going to be very specific, and it's going to be very much the same pitch throughout every interpretation. But that's just what I can do. I have nothing against him for doing that. None whatsoever. You do what you got to do, my man. That's the nature of the game. That's the nature of the game. So the Capote stuff, I find it infuriating and lackluster, and I'm just like, we really want everyone to have every moment of their lives hinge on Truman Capote, which just feels exhausting. Look, it's a beautiful show. The location shots are really sweeping and cool. I like the costuming for the most part. You picked a lot of great actresses to really nail this tone, and I love to see that. Naomi Watts. She's kind of like the leader of the bunch. She plays Babe Powley, and she's just incredible. The best performance of the bunch. Truly, truly inspirational. I love everything she's doing. Even if it is just like, it's more about her relationship with Capote, and she becomes like the central figure of like, oh, before she goes, is she going to reconcile? Is she going to agree to the terms of this man? When she's not really like leading the charge against him for the most of the beginning. She's great. Naomi Watts, a great name to throw in there for me. Diane Lane. Oh, yes, please. Diane Lane as Slim Keith. Oh, she's so good. I love me some Diane Lane. Slide me off a piece of that, please. I love it so much. And you're just like, oh, Diane Lane's so good. And she like talks one way, does another thing. She's so good at that. The Swans are so well cast. I cannot deny that at all. They are fantastic. Chloe Sevigny as CZ Guest. Ooh, I love Chloe. Anytime Chloe shows up in something, I'm happy to see her. Callista Flockhart as Lee Radziwill. Ooh, God. Again, like, you are getting me so excited. You're like, we got Naomi Watts, and we got Diane Lane, and we got Chloe in here. And now we got Callista Flockhart. And then Demi Moore shows up for a little bit. And I'm like, yes. And then Molly Ringwald shows up for a little bit. And I'm like, yes. These are the things I like. These are women that could do a Ryan Murphy thing. It's a shame that they're not, like, doing more. Because, they're just all so good in this vibe. And there's so much more interesting characters than the stuff with Capote. But even so, when it's, like, 4 of these beautiful babes at a table. And they're just like, should we talk about Capote? It's like, no, don't. You'll get on with your lives. Be there for each other. Be friendship and stuff. But it's also just like high status socialite events where everyone has a party. And if you're not invited, you're not in the inn, And we're just going to have like a dinner guest who's a little more eccentric than other ones. And that definitely feels like we're kind of moving out of that era where people want to see that on television. There were times where I, who's somebody who loves that stuff, was just put off by it. I'm like, I don't need to see this for 8 episodes. We use a lot of the same setting, which I get, because they don't really like travel much. They're kind of just like their restaurant, their apartment, this other location, and sometimes they're outside. You know, so I guess we don't need to do much of that. But it's just, I wish there was some more oomph to this, where I could spend more time with the Swans. I feel like if we just dedicated this to the Swans, not made it about a feud where we have to cut to Capote all the time, it'd feel better. And Treat Williams, he did pretty good too. I gotta say, that is a role that is not going to be treated well by a lot of people. And you kind of have to like just do the job, get in, get out. And he does pretty well with that. Look, I know what to expect from Feud. There is just a bunch of time jumping back and forth and clear motives behind characters. And sometimes the motives are clear, that we have seen in other seasons of like these Ryan Murphy adjacent shows. And sometimes like this, it's kind of muddled into we're trying to be aspirational and talk about things without being too deep in them. And you're just like, don't pull your punches, you know? Let's actually talk about some stuff. They try to, but they never fully get into it that much. Maybe if we had a couple more episodes. Maybe if we didn't have a hard-on for Truman Capote the whole time. Either way, what I wanted to be special, because you have a bunch of ladies I love, turned out to be something very middling and never fully figured out what it wanted to be. I wouldn't be surprised if Tom Hollander got a couple of Emmy noms, because that's the kind of role that people like. But I was over it. So, Feud, Capote versus the Swans, I am going to give a 6 out of 10. Now, thank you all for watching this review. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. As always, you can check me out on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And of course, I will catch you in the next one. Have fun. Stay safe. Good luck.